This video is sponsored by Crippled God Foundry. You're working through your sea of gray when you realize your model looks kind of boring. Maybe it's a boring model, boring colors, boring, whatever. Here are 3 easy ways to add interest to your model. If you haven't actually started yet, then an easy way to add excitement to your miniature is by using complementary colors, which are colors across from each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors are the most contrast you can find in hue. This contrast excites our eyes and makes us want to keep looking. But Lyla, I thought you said this video was going to be easy. And you're right, don't panic. We are going to use a website called coolers.co to pick our palette for our miniature. Coolers is a website designed specifically for creating color palettes. What we want to do is click Explore Color Palettes. Now you can use one of the color palettes you find on this page, that's totally fine. But they can still be a little overwhelming. Instead, I like to choose monochromatic in the drop-down and choose 2 monochromatic palettes. A monochromatic color scheme is a selection of colors that all use the same or similar base colors or hue. We want our 2 palettes to be complementary colors, or near complementary colors. One will be our main color palette, which we will use through the majority of our model, and the second one will be our accent palette, which is the colors we're going to use to areas we want to draw the eye. From there, you can then mix the colors you find in your 2 monochromatic palettes to create new tones, and of course add in tones that are required, for example, skin tones. Unless you're really skilled, I recommend having your main color palette be more desaturated and your secondary or accent palette being the more vibrant one. On this model, my red pinkish tones are going to be my main palette and therefore not quite as saturated, and my secondary tones are going to be these greens. But why does this work? Well, it's because it's pretty hard to mess up a monochromatic color scheme. If you're using colors that are all similar in hue, they're all pretty much going to work well together. Working monochromatically will allow us to focus instead on saturation and value, or the intensity of our colors and how we're going to highlight and shade our model, instead of also worrying about hue. Okay, but what if you've already started painting your model and it's too late to change colors? Then it sounds like you want to use inks. Inks are liquid color that can be applied to your model at any time. You can use inks to intensify color or to shift color after you've applied it. Inks can be applied with an airbrush or by hand, depending on the severity of boringness your model suffers from. Take note that inks can be extremely intense, so you always want to thin them down and start slowly to build up more and more color. Let's take a minute to talk about this week's sponsor, Crippled God Foundry. Today I'm painting one of the modular gladiators and the Imperium champion from this month's set, Death Coliseum. Death Coliseum comes with 19 highly detailed models that all come pre-supported, as well as absolutely everything you need to set up your own Coliseum at your table. The arena, fighters, monsters, spectators, royalty, and even a bust of the Empress herself. As always, you also get access to 5e miniature lore and stat blocks. If a Coliseum or Gladiators is what your table is missing, be sure to check out Crippled God Foundry on Patreon as well as My Mini Factory. Thanks so much, Crippled God Foundry. Let's get back to painting. Okay, but what if color isn't enough? Or you're too far gone past that point and adding color really just isn't going to work anymore? Then the next thing you want to focus on is texture. To me, texture is a broad term used to describe the breaking up of smooth surfaces on your model. This monotony can be broken up by choosing the materials of the subject on your model, or can be done just through brushwork and style. Since this model is a pit fighter, I want to add blood splatter and mud. These elements are going to do 2 things. 1, they will add interest, and 2, they're going to help tell a story. Other types of textures include stippling or cross-hatching to mimic the texture of fabric or fur, or banal damage or weathering. Consider the sort of story you want the model to tell, and that will help you choose what, if any, texture to add to your miniature. Just remember that the reason we're adding texture to this model is to add variety. So if you make the whole thing textured, then you're just back to where you started because now there isn't any variety. Lastly, let's start on the base. Now the base might seem like a throwaway part of the model, but it's actually a great opportunity to add interest and story to your model. The most important thing when creating a base is, again, variety, and my lucky number for variety is 3. For the ground texture, I'm counting the base as 1 texture, and then I will be adding super glue and baking soda as well as sand. Now let's talk about painting. I'm thinking that I'm going to paint the base itself warmer tones to match the model, and then I'm going to pull in that green from the armor with the foliage that I'm going to be applying later. Then I'll do several shades of dry brushing, as well as applying some strategic areas of color to again get that variety we find in nature. Finally, it's time for the foliage, and I'm going to choose, again, 3 textures. One of them is going to be this bush texture, my third is going to be a bit of static grass and tuft grass, and 3 is going to be this green clump seed, I don't really know what it's called, but it's going to add texture. I'm starting by gluing down the biggest pieces first, and then sprinkling on the loose foliage last. Okay, let's let it dry. The last thing I'm doing is taking my airbrush and blowing away any of that loose foliage that didn't get glued down to the base. Alright guys, that's it from me. You know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, join me over on Patreon, or watch one of these recommended videos.